समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
West Bengal is heading for elections, and you remember what we did before Bihar elections? Before Bihar elections, I gave you the video version of the earlier episodes of Writings on the Wall that I had written on Bihar. As you know, through elections for about 30 years now, I have traveled across some states during elections and come back reading the writings on the wall, right? And getting a sense of what's going on in the state. With Bihar, I had given you the entire collection before the elections, and I did one during the elections also. This one is my first writings on the wall on West Bengal, published on 12th of May 2011. That was the time when Mamata Banerjee was fighting from outside. So here is how the story went, or the writings on the wall as I read them in the summer of 2011. Some conclusions, I said, look obvious after traveling through West Bengal in the last week of the election campaign then. One, that we are guilty of exaggerating the left's brutalities and understanding its intellectual failure to comprehend a modernizing society's hunger for upward mobility. Two, that by presuming that the people of the state would be grateful for blessing them with filled bellies, ke pet bhara hua hai, the left front has also been guilty of greatly undermining the entrepreneurship of Bengali people and thereby strengthening the terrible stereotyping of them as lazy, unambitious, non-entrepreneurial. Nothing could be more unfair to an intelligent, politically aware people who, just like the Malayalis and Punjabis, both considered more entrepreneurial than the Bengalis, do very well when they go out to work in other parts of the country and indeed the world. Just look at how Bengalis dominate the world of media, both news and entertainment, for example, marketing and advertising, IT and banking. The left's most fatal blunder lies, I had said then, in underestimating this aspirational yearning in spite of the fact that the remarkable mandate they got in 2006, defying 29 years of anti-incumbency, emanated from a new promise of growth and industrialization. 2006, they promised growth and industrialization and still messed it up. You would expect leaders of the left to disagree vehemently with this. But it is surprising when that disagreement comes from Gautam Deb, the left front's Minister for Housing, and its rising star and showman. Once again, this is the summer of 2011. Surprising also because among all the left front leaders you meet, with the exception of Buddhadev Bhattacharya, he, the builder of Rajarhat Township in Kolkata, is the most candid and realistic. That is Gautam Deb. Just an hour earlier, we saw him ask a rally of the faithful that filled the main square in Purulia a telling question. In 2009, if 5 of our 7 voters left us, who do we blame except ourselves? He feeds a very hungry group of journalists Monaco and bourbon biscuits with tea at Purulia's newly built PWD circuit house and elaborates on this soul searching. 2009 was a parliament election. In the 2009 elections, he says, there were 3 slogans, parliament election: defeat the Congress, keep the BJP out, and set up a third front government at the center. And some particular leader's name was also mentioned as its prime minister. That leader, by the way, was Mayawati. Then his eyes taking the entire audience in its grave sweep through his Max Mara glasses, good communist, he tells you what bombed. The third slogan failed entirely. We were not able to convince people anywhere that we had an alternative, that we had a ministerial choice. The choice then was Mayawati. That is why he still thinks an assembly vote may be different, though the left has to make very deep introspection. Aberrations have come in. Communists have to again learn to behave like communists, he said, but that is where his ideological immune system strikes back. You offer to him your basic hypothesis, the left's inability to move on from subsistence to aspiration, and he makes philosophically the most stunning claim you have ever heard in a political campaign, and ironical that it happens to be spoken in Bengal, supposedly the fount of all intellect in India. The reason his party continued to get re-elected and is now on the ropes, he says, is that for 34 years, the heightened political consciousness of the Bengali people was not adulterated by materialistic temptations. Now, has anybody ever heard a more convoluted, cynical, and outdated definition of an innocent, virtuous, and basic human instinct called aspiration? Once again, let me sum it up. He says for 34 years, the left did so well, brilliantly in Bengal was that the Bengali mind was not adulterated, the word he used, adulterated by materialism. Now it's back. That is his definition of aspiration. Purulia is in fact a fascinating place for us to start discussing on hope and aspiration. Lack of rain and groundwater because of laterite bedrock, as Deb explains, that's the land there, that's the soil, that renders farming a part-time avocation at best. The few coal mines are hopelessly run down. The percentage of BPL population below poverty line is 55%, this is 2011, compared to the state average of 22% and neighboring Durgapur 17%. Almost equally poor Bankura next door would still have some recall because of its terracotta art, Bankura horses, but Purulia would have remained forever out of sight, out of mind, but for mercenary thugs like Peter Bleach and Kim Davy choosing its wastelands to make a mysterious arms drop in 1995. The only thing you can say is that they would not have found the district very different from what it is now. Since 1995 to 2011, it looked like nothing had changed there. The main square where Deb speaks is ringed by 4 photo studios. In most cities of this size, you would struggle to find one photo studio as the business has more or less gone out of fashion with the advent of phone cameras and filmless, darkroom-less technologies. Not in Purulia. Studio Style, that's the name of a studio. Studio Style does not seem to have had much business, but its very verbose signboard is like an abridged CV of its owner, Mahadev Barai, with an award from Rashtrapati and Diploma d'Honneur from Spain. Next door, we walk around the district collector's office searching for a PC, personal computer, but fail to locate one, underlining the left's odd suspicion of computers. Finding a toilet wasn't such a problem. You could smell it from 20 yards. And this, you can see, is a valued possession of this office. Read the foundation stone laid by a senior IAS officer, that's the collector's office, a poor fellow called Kathiresan. Poor fellow only because he would not have read the inscription on that stone, or I doubt if he would have put his name etched in stone to something that lists, among other facilities consecrated by him, a cycle stand, a women's toilet, 5 men's urinals, including one that is new, and so on and so forth. But not all writings on the wall here are silly. This one is silly, but not all are silly or non-existent or merely political. In the main market, the Purulia equivalent of a high street, you do see a spanking new signboard of one of India's largest broking firms, India Infoline. If Deb is looking for inspiration, however, he has to see his own cadres. On the narrow but decent road running from Bankura through Purulia, we find a long, orderly CPM procession. There are chants with the familiar Bengali intonation of Zindabad, Zindabad, and Vote Din, Vote Din. That's a very, very familiar Bengali electoral intonation. But what strikes you is how much better these partymen look compared to the rest. Not rich, but just much less poor. They all sport new red nylon t-shirts with CPM symbols and caps that many wear front to back, the usual baseball dude style. But the more striking thing is their relaxed, unself-conscious, confident demeanor. Scores pull out their phones and take pictures of our group as we walk around. It's the only time I have seen marchers in a procession taking more pictures of journalists than the other way around. If a gaggle of Japanese tourists had arrived in Purulia, they would have been completely thrown by this reversal. And if a tech upgrade is not aspirational, what is Comrade Gautam Deb up to? Ask him if communists are capable of changing, modernizing, and he asks, why not? I use iPad, he says, and explains triumphantly how he heard about the Anand Bazar Patrika carrying a story on Mamata's shadow cabinet while boarding a plane and immediately downloaded it so he could respond. I also use GPS in my vehicle, he says. Google helps me take shorter routes and also avoid Maoist areas. But I'm sure nobody has as yet invented a GPS to enable you to avoid Maoist areas in the southern Purulia, Bankura, Midnapur triangle, loosely described as Jungle Mahal. And why should you even wish to do that if your idea is to understand the new stirrings of change in Bengal, as was our idea? You know the political landscape has changed as you drive past newly laid out armed police camps with their multi-layered barbed wire fences, sentry posts, machine gun nests in that region. What was the Maoist zone of West Bengal? Even the odd mine-resistant troop carrier with its ugly but life-saving elevated chassis and oversized wheels. Lalgarh was a revolutionary battle zone like no other since Naxalbari because this was quote unquote liberated territory for months, and it caused the nostalgic fancy of Calcutta's or Kolkata's genteel, old, creative classes who set up an overground organization and imaginatively named it the People's Committee Against Police Atrocities, PCAPA. Initially, they were partners with the Trinamool against the CPM as their common enemy, but now there is a falling out, particularly as the PCAPA's local star, Chhatradhar Mahato, is contesting from the local constituency Jhargram from jail. His brother, Shashadhar, a prominent Maoist fighter, was killed in an encounter recently, then 2011, under the leadership of its district secretary Deepak Sarkar. More about him I'll tell you later. The CPM has wrested Lalgarh back from the Maoists, Lalgarh the territory, but the PCAPA's articulate, angry, and determined support base in intellectual Kolkata is intact. You find some of them sitting in one neat row under a tree in the village of Barapelia, which has seen intense fighting and killings, along with Chatradhar's wife and his party spokesman just out on parole. Much of the talking is done by documentary filmmaker Sumit Chaudhary in his smooth, measured baritone to match his platinum locks tied neatly at the back. Chatradhar, he says, has expressed total faith in the Indian constitution and has nothing to do with the Maoists. But what about the Maoist cause? That he won't elaborate, other than to say that there is a problem there. India is governed by an upper crust, upper caste elite which does not care about tribal people. There is some merit in that, though you could argue about how best to redress that through armed insurgency or by deepening democracy. But you can't help noting that even in that small gathering of spokespersons and ideologues, there isn't a single tribal. These are all non-tribal revolutionaries fighting for the supposed tribal cause. Not even Chhatradhar Mahato. Mahatos are OBCs, other backward castes, the local equivalent of the Yadavs. This fits in entirely with the pattern of the largest Maoist leadership in central India. This revolution will be led by non-tribals and fought, if they had their way, to the last tribal. That is what right now is folding up dramatically. I jump from 2011 to 2026 now, when armed Maoism is almost entirely finished. Back to 2011 West Bengal. The man who won the first round against the Maoists and restored normalcy in Lalgarh would hardly fit that description. His name is Deepak Sarkar. Deepak Sarkar, 73, used to teach political science in a Midnapur college until he joined politics full time. A man of slight build and gentle speech and demeanor, he hardly looks like the one who is said to have led the partymen who threw the Maoists out of Jungle Mahal. His critics say he has been the inspiration behind many massacres. His supporters see him as a savior. He is a man of a few but carefully chosen words as he chats with us in his district party office in Midnapur and softly but contemptuously takes apart the Maoists, all the time under the benign gaze of the portrait of the great stalwarts of the communist movement in India and elsewhere: Lenin, Stalin, Marx, Engels, Ho Chi Minh, and indeed Chairman Mao. You try to ambush him by reminding him that he was cursing the Maoists under the portrait of Mao. But he is prepared. That Mao we follow. We are his Maoists, he said. These people are not Maoists. They are left degenerates. Has he led a counterattack on them by putting local against local, tribal against tribal, we ask? I am a communist, he says. It is my basic duty to organize the people. Mao, I suppose, would have a tough choice deciding which side would he be on, these Maoists or those Maoists. A nightly, postprandial, post-dinner stroll in Midnapur tells you how the notion of rural decay in West Bengal is a bit inaccurate. The cities, in fact, are in a much more rotten state than villages. Garbage heaps brush your shoulder, desperate insects keep pace even as you break into a panicky trot, and you have no place to hide from the sight, smells, potholes, and puddles of an urban disaster. Then you walk into the railway station, lured by its bright lights. It was declared a model station by Mamata Banerjee in her earlier NDA innings as railway minister. It is a presentable building, a nice platform with LCD displays and 3 new ATMs of government banks underlining the new bonhomie between the railway and the finance ministries. But just in front, scores of people sleep in the open, sharing the floor with dogs, cockroaches, mosquitoes. Nobody remembered to build a basic shelter for them. And if you turn around, you spot a telling writing on the wall. Sam Higginbotham Institute, that was formerly Allahabad Agriculture Institute. Now, under a Fox English sounding avatar, it offers all kinds of technical degrees, and people will beg and borrow to send their children there. Read this wall to understand the desperation of aspiration in a land of no opportunity. This is the implication of Allahabad Agriculture Institute becoming Sam Higginbotham Institute. Sadly, you find the emptiest walls not in the faraway fighting zones of Jungle Mahal but in Singur, just 50 kilometers from Kolkata and along then newly four-laned NH6. The nano factory never came, the Tata Nano factory, but its shell stands along with the boundary wall around the land acquired for it. Each villager in the zone has his own story. Manoranjan Malik in Singur, whose daughter Tapushi was allegedly gang raped and killed by CPM goons, has his. And so does Bebeko Santra, a Dalit of nearby Joymala, who has no regret having lost his land, all of 40 square meters. 40 square meters. For which he got only rupees 4,000 because the factory had employed him in the housekeeping department. The political divisions in the region are vicious, but there is one thing on which they all agree, that the factory should come back here. Look at this baby, says Santra, pointing somewhat dramatically at the 6-month-old daughter on the shoulder of his neighbor, with 3 cold finger smudges on her forehead to ward off the evil eye, and a stone amulet hanging by a black thread resting on her bloated, malnourished belly. If she could speak, she would have said the same thing. I want the factory back. Singur is where Mamata Banerjee began her resurgence. This is where she will face her first test, because without industry, this is a zone of utter helplessness, utter hopelessness. Yes, the land is fertile and can yield 3 crops, but how can you romanticize a farming lifestyle where a joint family of 10 might have to survive on a farm the size of a kitchen garden in a Lutyens zone bungalow in New Delhi? There are no jobs, no money in the pocket, no economics. You come to Shingu to discover a site you left behind with your small town childhood, a watch repairer's shop, and you thought the business had disappeared with the arrival of quartz watches. It really has. This shop survives because the owner has nothing else to do. So he comes hoping to repair shops, even if people don't bring many now. You see many old clocks adorn his walls, but these are all empty shells, frozen in time, as much of rural Bengal has been under the left for quite some time now. But why talk about just the villages? In Kolkata, Chief Minister Buddhadev Bhattacharya speaks to us in his Alimuddin Street party office, his welcome remarks interrupted by the noontime azan from the neighboring mosque. Once again, he sits under the portraits of great communist visionaries, but that's not news. What's interesting is the big map of the world in Mercator projection that forms the backdrop. It was printed in 1987. Got the point? It still shows the Soviet Union as one giant, intact nation state dwarfing the rest of the world. This is more than 20 years after the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc ended. Do you then still go to Purulia's studio style or the watch repair shop in Singur with empty shelves of old clocks on its walls to believe that time has stood still in West Bengal? Buddha Babu smiles philosophically as his attention is drawn to the map. Is this one more evidence that communists are incapable of accepting change and reality? Of course, we are capable of changing, he says, and we are changing. I always say, I'm not here to create a socialist state. That's what Buddhadev Bhattacharya said. I function in our constitutional system, and let's admit it is capitalism now. But of all the political leaders we meet on this trip, Buddha Babu indeed seems and sounds the most serene, the most at peace with himself, sometimes even in an unwitting display of realism, slipping into the past tense and accepting the coming change with the equanimity of the great spiritual master Gautam Buddha that he was named after.